The Masters finally get an origin. Here's your look at the new Mattel Masters of the Universe Origins He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Modernizing and celebrating the original 80s Masters of the Universe action figures, Masters of the Universe Origins gives you the power to pose Eternia's greatest warriors as retro-style figures or in new action-packed battle positions. Before we get a closer look at Prince Adam of Eternia... Wait, what? What do you mean I wasn't supposed to say that? I thought everybody knew that. Oh, not everybody knows that. Before we get a closer look at He-Man, totally saved it. The first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figure actually stands. Now, there are two ways to go about doing this. You can either display him currently like I'm doing right now in his more quote-unquote bunny ears retro look that has the knees bent for this occasion. You can go that route, or you can straighten out those legs, stretch them out, and you can have a more modernized look for the figure. But I'm currently going to just get the measurements going for the way he looks right now, and then I'll show you how he switches over. Totally save that, by the way. No one is going to know anything. They're not going to know. The figure stands 5.6 inches in height. We can switch that to centimeters, revealing that He-Man from the Masters of the Universe Origins line is 14.4 centimeters tall. Now, admittingly, I'm a bit behind when having a look at these Masters of the Universe Origin figures. Simply put, I just never could find them here in local Canadian stores. At one point, they were Walmart exclusives, but as many people would tell you, Walmart barely stocked these. Eventually, when the circulation and distribution went across the board for all other retail stores, then they were a little bit easier to come by, but yet Canada still got squat, at least the places that I checked around. Luckily for me, viewer Sherwin stepped up to plate and was lucky enough, very nice on his part, was able to pick these all up for me. So we will be having a look at these in several reviews. If you certainly would like to check out some pretty cool photography using action figures, might I recommend that you head on over to Instagram and check out Shell Post. Sherwin does some incredible work with photography and action figures. Give that a good look when you get a chance. But let's get a good look at the accessories that come included with He-Man. Now, one thing I do like about this retro line of figures is that they do give you a lot of cool retro throwbacks. Specifically, the first one being the mini comic. It's not quite the same mini comic that, of course, we got with the original Masters figures, but it's pretty close to the job. Unfortunately, when I did get this out of the packaging, these were almost even taped in place. They were in just enough of a frame to hold the comic in place. But it was still enough that when I tried my best, very carefully to remove the comic, it unfortunately caused a little bit of a rip, a little tearage down below. And that really makes me sad. Now, I have heard that this comic seems to make appearances with all the other Masters Universe figures. If that be the case, then I'm not too disappointed by the fact that there is a rip on the bottom here. Because again, I could just replace it with one of the ones that we're going to be looking at with another Masters of the Universe Origin figure. But you see all the first lineup here. We will be having a look at all of these in upcoming video reviews, so stay tuned for those. Yes, again, I admit I'm a little behind on this. But just want to flip through the comic quickly to show you. Now, this goes to the idea that Prince Adam exists and has the power sword that transforms him into He-Man. The original mini comics from the 80s would have depicted He-Man rather more as a prehistoric caveman who would discover the power sword and through that become He-Man. But I do think the artwork is actually pretty good. It kind of reminds me of the 2000 series He-Man cartoon. Short-lived, if you ask me. I think it only gave us 3 seasons. You can see a really nice artwork there for Skeletor down below. And, of course, there is Prince Adam transforming into He-Man. A very quick, simple read. There's really not much to this particular story. But really, all the mini-comics were pretty short stories anyways. I'll put that to the side. He-Man also comes with some weapons, of course. Like his original retro counterpart, he comes with things like, for example, his shield. His shield is basically just done in plastic. And it seems like this part right here has been painted on. Although while looking at it, it kind of looks like it's actually plastic itself. Well, like a separate piece of plastic, but clearly they wouldn't have gone that route. Instead, they would have decided just, of course, to paint that place in. You can see on the back, there's the clip. Now this section will fit around He-Man's hands, and let me show you how that goes about. Of course, like with the vintage line, you're going to take the flatter end of He-Man's hands, because of course one is definitely designated for holding like his battle axe and his power sword. So this is the side, of course, you're going to want to take the shield. The shield just slides through, just like this. It doesn't really necessarily clamp onto his hand, but it certainly does clamp onto his forearm. You just have to make sure that you have it far enough in. Just bring the fingers forward like that, and just snap that into place. I find, like, admittingly, the shield doesn't really stay as well in place as I would hope. Like I said, if you get it just past the point of his bracelet here, can we call that a bracelet on He-Man? I guess it does do a pretty good job of staying in place. The only downside is it doesn't actually attach to his back. Well, it does, but I'll get more into that in a second. So he comes included with that. He, of course, comes included. Get the figure to stand properly. Comes also included with his battle axe. The battle axe is actually the same style of plastic used for the shield. No coloring on this, really, short of the fact that they just used the coloring of that blue grayish plastic to give the, of course, the molding of the battle axe. Just that's the color that they ended up using. Now you can take the battle axe. You can fit it obviously into He-Man's hands. Just like that, stays perfectly fine in place. Or you can also take the battle axe, go around to the back, and there's a little loop right here. You can either use for the power sword, or you can use it for his battle axe. Now when it comes to the battle axe, I'm sure I've already said battle axe several times already, when you are fitting it down into the loop, sometimes it's prone to then taking this strap off. Let me show you what's going on here. Just take this off. I find a lot of times when, again, I'm putting the battle axe in, what it ends up doing is it unlatches this whole back section. Because the whole idea is really like there's this little tab point right here that's supposed to, you bring this down, and this just fits in place like so. But it's just barely holding on to that. It's almost like just a hair trigger. The moment you put too much pressure against it, it seems to want to pop off. So yes, while it does fit the battle axe, last time I'm sure saying that, while it does fit it well into the back area there, if you do push it down too far or too aggressively, then yes, this dislodges and unlatches itself. And before you know it, you'll have to attach that back into place. So, of course, he does come with his battle axe. He also comes with his power sword. Now, I have a bit of an issue with his power sword. I appreciate the fact that when they went the route of doing the power sword, they went more the vintage design of the sword in the sense that it's a half sword. The other half is supposed to, of course, come with Skeletor, and like as the story goes, the two halves of the sword come together and create the power sword. I would have really appreciated if they could have actually given us a fully realized sword, where basically you get two versions of this sword. And then, of course, it's two halves, as opposed to just a flat sword. The flat sword, I get it. It's supposed to look like the vintage line. But I would have really given to have a full-sized, full-molded sword where it was molded on both sides. Unfortunately, you don't get that. But again, that fits into He-Man's hands as well. Just like that. Or again, you can take the sword, let go, let go, let go. And you can also feed that along to the back as well. Just like so. Now, one thing you can actually do as well with the shield, going back to that point, is remove the sword. You can take the shield. And the shield, again, kind of clamps onto the side, but not well enough. I mean, you really have to fight to kind of get it on there. Or what you can also do is flip this around. It's a little bit lower, mind you, on He-Man, but you can take something like the sword, for example, and feed that through. And it sort of serves to hold the shield in place. Admittingly, yes, it's too low on the figure, but it's one fix at least if you want to have the figure displayed with the shield. I guess there's no other way about it. You could use, again, that clamp, but I don't feel like the clamp really fits well enough on either side to kind of stay stable and in place. We'll go ahead and remove that. We'll put those to the side. Those are his weapons that come included with the figure. Now let's get a closer look at He-Man. As it currently stands, I've got him in that retro shape, that retro crouched wrestler mold that the original Masters figures would have had. You can also take the figure's legs, straighten them down, and you can also straighten these legs out as well to kind of give you more of a, not quite a classics He-Man look, because those classics were a little bit bigger than this, but gives you certainly a little bit more proportionally appropriate longer legs on He-Man. I'm fine really either or. I like the idea that you can actually pull that off, but as a marketing standpoint, really all it serves is that you're just bending the knees. I mean, I guess you could technically do that with any figure. You're just going to bring the legs forward, bend the knees down, and bingo bango, you got that figure in a more retro pose. But I appreciate the fact that they did think that way as opposed to just saying, well, you can bend the figure's knees. I mean, as it certainly goes, when you have the figure's legs straight, it does look like the thigh area sticks out just a little bit too far. But again, I get the idea that the whole reasoning of the design of the way that they've done it here is so that you can bend those knees. I probably will end up doing that when it comes to displaying the figure for myself, just because when I think of this line, I don't think of this line as what being the Classics was. The Classics line was sort of the next evolutionary step to the original Masters of the Universe figures, whereas I feel like these are more of a retro throwback without immediately just giving us retro figures. I appreciate for the fact that they actually did that, and I also enjoy the fact that they actually gave us the option to bend the knees like this if you want to have them in the more crouched retro pose. So let's talk a little bit about He-Man's head sculpt here for a second. This was a talking point that divided many Masters fans up the middle. Some fans enjoyed the new head sculpt that Mattel decided to go with for He-Man, while other fans thought it deviated too far away from the original toy line. I get to understand what they were supposed to be going with here. They really wanted to combine both the cartoon look of He-Man and the original Masters of the Universe He-Man, and that's why you sort of get a combination of the both. You get the more grimmest head sculpt that we would have gotten with the original vintage line, and yet you get the longer hair that would have been more akin to like the cartoon, for example. I didn't really like this head sculpt, admittingly, and maybe that was one of the reasons why I didn't get on board this line immediately, and probably one of the reasons why I didn't just order these online on places like eBay, for example, because I was really on the fence with what I thought about this head sculpt. Now the time I've spent a little bit looking at the figure, actually putting the figure on display, playing and posing him in different, of course, poses, the fact that he does have the Poseability that we'll talk about in a second. I will say that the head sculpt has grown on me. I still don't love it, but I think I like it a little bit more than I did before. I think one of the things that throws me off about the head sculpt is the teeth. The fact that they've got the visible, kind of anguished looking face, specifically again in that mouth area. The eyes aren't bad, neither are the caterpillar eyebrows, and I do like the longer hair, but I think it's the teeth that throws it off more than anything else for me. But then I ask myself, would I want just a neutral expressioned He-Man? And maybe I don't either. It would be one of those things you never really make a Masters fan, or really any fan of vintage toy lines, happy. Because there's always going to be people that appreciate and welcome new changes to the figures, and there's always going to then be collectors that want the figures to look like their original retro lines. And I guess with He-Man, Mattel has accommodated both that market. You still kind of get the design and build of a traditional He-Man figure from the 80s, but again, I can understand why they wanted to do a little bit something different to the head sculpt. And while I'm not crazy about it, I do think that I like it a lot more now, physically, seeing the figure in hand than what I did before. Of course, we can talk a little bit more about the figure. I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about just simply the head sculpt. But just know, I don't hate it as much as I did before. And somebody's like, wow, thank you. Thank you for not hating it as much as you did before. As for the rest of his body, it's really very, very much traditional looking He-Man. The fur loincloth, for example, the cross torso piece, that armor piece that he wears, of course, it's painted generally quite well. There are a few little areas there on the cross. Yes, the paint doesn't quite cover everything. There's a few little areas as well where you've got a little bit of paint mishap. But generally, though, it's all very traditional vintage toy line for me, and that's what I really like. I will say, though, like looking at the figure, there are a few little things that kind of still bother me a little bit, like He-Man's feet, for example. I don't know why, but I find the feet are way too small, especially when you look at the rest of the figure. Now, the figure is a lot smaller when you get this in hand. I somehow thought the figure would be a lot bigger. Maybe because, again, I never really saw these in toy stores. Seeing it now physically in hand, the figure does feel a little bit small, but it feels about the same size as that original vintage line. Like the muscle on this guy is pretty good. I would imagine that they're probably going to be using, like the original vintage line, a lot of these same mold elements for future Masters of the Universe figures. And we'll probably see a lot more of that as we go through this line together. Of course, things that will be carrying over to other figures as well as the molding of the bracelets on the sides of his arms, for example. That's painted nicely in the orange. The belt area of his loincloth painted nicely as well. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily a loincloth. It's almost like a little lower fur underoos. But that's painted well also, you can see with the orange belt. I like the coloring of orange that they use, and I specifically also dig the coloring of this blue-based gray that they ended up going with when it came to his armor piece. Again, I only wish that this could have stayed in place a little bit better. It stays well as it is, but as soon as you start putting stuff in there, I find like this really wants to dislodge from itself, unlatch from that little bit that it's holding on to. On the back, you can see 2020 Mattel. Unavoidable for the fact that they had to print that on the back, I'm sure. I guess no other place where they could have actually put that. But again, like the only thing I would really say for the figure is, again, I find like the feet are a little on the small side. And just due to the sculpting of the way that he has to hold his sword, he's got this really awkward looking ledge there on the bottom of his hand. Now again, these are all small minor nitpicks. By all means, this is not the thing that's going to break this toy line for me, but it's again just things that I'm noticing. Like the hands I find a little on the small side, but I find his feet are really, really tiny on this particular figure. Now let's have a look at the articulation on He-Man. His head rotates all the way around. It moves up, it moves down, and you can also rock it back and forth. The arms can hinge out. You can rotate those arms all the way around. And it always kind of looks like He-Man is giving thumbs up. If you aren't going to be putting a power sword or the battle axe into his hand, then yes, admittingly, He-Man always looks like he's rooting for his team. Good job, guys. Well done. With his little slightly crooked thumb sticking up there. But he does have a bend in the elbow. You can rotate that forearm, and you can also rotate the hand all the way around, hinging it back and forth. He doesn't have the feature, of course, to pull back and lash forward, but he does have the closest next best thing. He has just a straight swivel on his waist. Then for the legs split out with a ball joint, you can see right there, forward and back on the legs. He has a bend at the knee, lower leg rotates, and also the lower boot rotates, where this piece is, of course, pegged into the top of his calf. And then, of course, his little tiny, mini little feet can also bend back and forth, and you can also ankle pivot them as well. For the full effect, let's go ahead and get the power sword. Again, the only other thing that I would say, a little disappointed on this line, is just the fact that He-Man, here we go, get the iconic look down. The other thing is the fact that I wish that the power sword could have come as a full, complete piece. I like the fact that they did give you the half and half treatment, because, of course, that lends well to the original vintage line. But man, I would have also enjoyed a fully sculpted, fully realized power sword. You still can pull off the look almost, with He-Man reaching to the sky and getting the powers of Eternia and Castle Grayskull. But unfortunately, with the articulation on this particular figure, it has just the right amount. But because, of course, you can't bend the wrist as much as you could, you can't get that full straightened out pose. But that's definitely probably going to be the way I'm going to decide to display He-Man for myself. The question just is going to be whether I'm going to go with that retro hunched, crouched pose, or you can also straighten out the legs. Here in the end of this review, I've just decided to straighten out the legs. It does make the proportions of the figure look a little bit more so. But again, I appreciate the fact that Mattel would have given you the options to display the figure in those two different ways. By far, the biggest bummer to this line had to be the fact that they were once Walmart exclusives. Now, if you ask me, I think Walmart totally dropped the ball when it came to releasing and distributing these to all their stores. I checked around to not one, not two, but 5 different Walmart stores in my somewhat immediate area, and not one of them stocked a Masters of the Universe Origin figure. Not one of them. And I don't even think they actually had a shelf space assigned for Masters of the Universe Origin figures. And I've heard slightly better stories from people over the border. People in the United States have found Masters of the Universe figures, but it seemed like the case that Walmart was maybe putting out a case. And before you know it, scalpers would be scooping them up and selling them on eBay, leaving behind many He-Mans and many Skeletors. That has since improved, and yet Canada still gets the shaft, unfortunately, when it comes to actually finding these locally. I, of course, checked other resources and other available options like Walmart.ca, and they may have had 1 or 2. Maybe they had a Battle Cat and they had a Man-at-Arms, and that was it. I've also checked Amazon, Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and unfortunately, again, just wasn't available. Walmart.com had it, but unfortunately, Walmart.com doesn't ship to Canada. Oh, the struggles of a Canadian collector. Luckily for me, viewer Sherwin very gracefully picked these ones up for me and sent them my way. And again, a big thank you, Sherwin, for taking the time and sending these my way, because it was always going to be a case that I wanted to pick up Masters of the Universe Origin figures. Having grown up with the original retro line, this was right up my alley. What wasn't up my alley, though, was having to go on places like eBay and pay almost 4 times the marked up price to what these were actually selling on like retail store shelves. So again, a big thank you to Sherwin, who picked these ones up. I do like this line. Now, granted, I've only just looked at He-Man so far. I'm going to have a look at the rest of the first wave and go from there. I like the look of He-Man. There are things that, of course, bothered me in the beginning, like He-Man's head sculpt, which has grown on me. I wish he could have come with a full power sword instead of just a halvesies deal. I know we want to be making a power sword sandwich once we get ourselves Skeletor, but come on, I would have liked to have actually got a full-sized sword as well. I get the idea that this is supposed to be a hark back to the original vintage line, and of course the original vintage line only gave you half the power sword. His feet are really small, but that's not enough that's going to be certainly a deal breaker for this line. I am very excited certainly to have a look at the rest of these. And even though, yes, I'm a little behind with having a look at the Masters of the Universe Origin figures while everybody else has done it, everybody on the block has already had their party, and I'm just now putting up all the balloons in my household. So I do, unfortunately, apologize for that. But rest assured, we will be having a look at the rest of the Masters of the Universe Origin figures, all again thanks to viewer Sherwin. Hey now, if you guys also want to check out some pretty cool photography that I did mention at the beginning of this review, do check out Shell Pose. That's Sherwin's company name, I guess his photographer's name on Instagram. He also posts on Facebook as well. Really check out his stuff. He does some really amazing photography using NECA Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Really some cool work there. But let me know down below in the comments section how successful you've been picking up the Masters of the Universe Origin figures. Are you in Canada? Have you been not really finding anything, like unfortunately like I have? Or have you been doing a pretty good job of actually finding these now? I know, again, they're kind of getting a little more circulated than what they were originally. But again, I'm very excited for what Mattel has in store for us Masters fans. Not only with the rest of the figures that we're going to be having a look at on this channel, but the rest of the future figures that we're going to be getting down the road. If you are new to this channel and you're liking all the content you're seeing, don't mind the fact that I'm a little behind when having a look at Masters of the Universe Origin figures. Thank you for that, by the way. Thank you for your pity. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Turn the bell notification on, and by all means, come back to this channel Monday to Friday, 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where not only are we going to be looking at the rest of the Masters of the Universe Origin figures, but we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of other cool collectibles and figures as well. Always stuff coming your way, guys, so keep your Masters peepers peeled to this channel Monday to Friday at those designated times. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.